Well, greetings, friends. Welcome to the LENR Forum Cold Talk, where we're going to be surveying the development of LENR-based new energy science and technology. I'm Ruby Carat, hailing from beautiful Eureka, California, and I'm here with my co-hosts and collaborators, Alan Smith, who's checking in from London, and we have David Nygren, who is here from Stockholm. Welcome, gentlemen. It's great to see you on our first inquiry into this field.
Thank you for starting us off, Ruby. And welcome, Monty. We three have been plotting this project for some time, and you are the first, as Ruby would say.
I'm privileged.
David?
Yes, and we have as our first guest Mr. Montgomery Childs of the Sapphire project. Sapphire, of course, is an experiment, and it stands for Stellar Atmospheric Function in Regulation Experiment. Its stated objective was to test the electric sun model. Since then, experiments have revealed other unusual effects, such as distinct layers of plasma, each with unique characteristics, and excess heat in the megawatt range, to name a few. And here to tell us about this newly developing technology is Montgomery Childs, the principal scientist and design engineer of the Sapphire project. Thank you for being with us, Montgomery Childs.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be here.
Well, your primary objective in designing this plasma experiment was to test the electric sun model. Could you start by telling us a little bit about what is the electric sun model and why was it important for you to test this model?
Well, there's a bit of a story here because I just want your guests to understand that myself or my team still are not. I mean, we're not part of what you call the electric universe community. Over the years, I was brought on by corporations as a person that could go in and diagnose and come up with ideas as to what was going on with many complex systems. And just to make a long story short, the EU community contacted me and asked me if I would do an evaluation of their model. And I told them at the time, like, there's a lot of theoretical science, which we would classify as natural philosophy these days as being accepted as being fact, when in reality it's, they have to remain, as you might say, theoretical models and not factual science. So our team is into applied science. We're not, theoretical scientists. We're the guys that, the team that tests things, So what I did an initial evaluation on the electric universe model, and over a couple of years determined that it might be possible to test at least a portion of their hypothesis or the model. I wouldn't say it's a hypothesis, because the term hypothesis is something that's mature, okay? But it doesn't mean you can't test a model or an idea. It just has to be mature enough that you can conceive of the way that you might be able to do that. So sometimes the math precedes the experiment. Sometimes the mathematics is post-experimental. So you come up with results, and then you can develop more mature mathematical models. And so what I told him at the time, I said, look, what I see happening here, you've got the gravitational model, you've got the electric universe model. There might be other models out there, but those are probably the two primary models of the universe that we live. And I told him at the time, like, unless you test this, I think you're going to be in ongoing discussions for years at an academic level, which is important, but does it really move the science ahead? And I said to them at the time that, in my view, that I think if you don't test this model, that you're going to be stuck basically as merry-go-round, like this discussion back and forth. And so I gave a lecture at the University of Maryland. We met at Johns Hopkins, and but it was around 2013 that I was asked to put a team together and go out and see if we could test it. And I told him, I said, well, let's not spend a lot of money. Let's just do some basic proof of concepts first, before we get into some really, really heavy financing to build a large reactor. And we did, and that was 2013 and 14. And it performed way beyond our expectations. And I guess one of the more notable characteristics were the plasma double layers, the self-organization that we see occurring and that you see occurring in many of our videos now and the pictures that you see, that I would say there's some indication that might occur in prior work from Schmidt and Fiorotto out of University of Pennsylvania and other places, but nothing like what we saw with Sapphire. And right now there is no math that can predict these. It doesn't exist. And we've had some of the best people in the world on our team to try to model these things in plasma physics, and it's not possible at this time. So with that was probably one of the first, you might say, qualitative observations that we made that we'd say was analogous to what we see going on with atmospheres, whether it was planets or stars, in the self-organizing nature of these plasmas. But then there was more in that the original experiment, as many of your listeners maybe already know about, in that the original one, we had 1800 watt input power, and we did measure for certain power surges, not spikes, but power surges of over 2 million. In some cases, the highest we measured was 12 million watts. Out of a
Well,
ball that
before
was
you go
about,
on, can I ask you, how does the experiment operate? And how is it that you're able to create conditions that you believe are like the sun, where hot fusion scientists have not been able to create these conditions for any length of time?
well, nice short question, but well, where do you start with that? It's a great question. If you want to differentiate between particle physics, or you might say kinetic models where you're smashing atoms together, Sapphire is a bit of a hybrid. You've got high energy kinetic plasma engines, you might say, like tokamak and ITER. Then you have non-collisional plasmas, which we see as an example in maybe a quiescent or kind of a glow discharge plasma. And what we've been able to determine is that Sapphire is a combination of both. We have evidence that, when I say evidence, I mean stuff that we've measured, that ions are at the very outer reaches towards the negative side of the chamber, you might say floating. They're not really smashing up against the walls of the chamber. And on the other hand, when we get down close into the higher density plasmas that we see in Sapphire, they would be collisional, but they wouldn't be of the order of magnitude that you see, like, say, in ITER. Now, so that's, you might say, from a physics perspective, there's similarities, but they're not of that magnitude, okay? So that's one part of this. The other part, you might say, is chemistry and other components, you might say, are factors associated with the formation of the plasma double layers and elemental transmutation. And in nuclear chemistry, transmutation happens all the time in these nuclear power plants. And it's a big problem for them. They start off with uranium, they get, cesium and plutonium and other things. In particle physics, they don't really address that at all. There's no real solution, you might say, in plasma physics to account for transmutation, unless they smash things together to cause fusion under that kinetic energy. So it's a problem, because these two disciplines, they really do live in two very different worlds. Even though they're very closely related, one can't account for the other. They're very different, but they're very related. So Sapphire is unique in a sense that we have collisional and non-collisional plasma in there, but we also have, and what we know now is that chemistry is playing a huge role, and anyone who's in LENR would understand that. What we also know too, and this probably wouldn't be too out of line, is what we suspect and have evidence of is that for these transmutations to occur, we suspect it's more of a resonance occurrence under those conditions that may be the cause of some of these things. But we don't hold to any one particular theory, okay? Because we suspect that it could be a combination of theories. You know, you've got hydrinos, you've got EVOs, you've got a number of theories that are out there, and it could be that you know, if you take a few pages out of each of them, is where maybe in 10 years we could be in a place where we understand effectively and mathematically what's going on there. And that's going to take a lot of work because it's no longer particle physics or kinetic physics and or nuclear chemistry. It's going to be a combination of both. This is the evidence that we have right now. If I'm answering your question in a kind of long about way.
It was a very good answer, actually, Monty.
I'm sorry, you're kind of breaking up a bit. Your microphone is.
It was a very good answer. It covered more ground than I expected.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
I can, but.
Yeah, it just sounds a little weird, like, well, like.
It sounds like you're
weird,
talking in a tin can, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then it's kind of.
I can't help sounding like that, Monty. It comes with the artificial larynx. Excuse me.
Well, let's talk about some of the effects that you've seen, and you describe these layers, and we've seen pictures of some of these different layers. What is up with all those different layers, and how did you first even know to find them?
We didn't. We got predictions from the electric universe like Wal Thornhill and Don Scott that we should expect to see an organization of plasma. But I would say that at the time, from our side, we weren't making any predictions. We said, okay, well, if you're going to test a model, first of all, and somebody comes to you and say, look, I want you to test this. And they have to leave it up to you to test it. So you do the best you can to model what it is that they're asking you to test. And they're saying, well, if you test it, you know, we think you should be able to find this, this, and this. And we don't know, right? I mean, we're not projecting into it what we should or shouldn't see. So I would say from our perspective, I wouldn't have said that at the time that we would have expected or not expected plasma double layers to form, okay? The EU, like the Wal Thornhills and Don Scotts together would say that they would expect to see that kind of organization. But they themselves, it's not been seen before, not that kind of organization. But it happened. And so that's, from a testing perspective, our job is to say, well, you guys are making this claim that this should happen. Then what we do is to say, well, does it happen? And in the meantime, we're also using what's called a null hypothesis. We're also using an approach to see if we can disprove their claims. So it's really important because some people put us together with the EU but we're not. We're an objective, independent corporation that our job is to really shake it out and see, you know, if the claims are true or not. Because if it turns out that one claim that they make is not true, well, that would be important for them to know. It means that maybe they have to adjust their model somehow. And so the double layers themselves, the numerous double layers, I wouldn't say they predicted, but they did predict that there would be plasma double layers. The characteristics of these double layers, to answer your question, have a lot of, you might say, features or, as I said, characteristics to them. What we find is we did an analysis, Lowell Morgan, when he was with our team, myself, wrote a paper. In these double layers, they act like energy wells where there's concentration. So it's acting, you might say, like an energy capacitor in between each one of them. And that's where the energy is being stored. So if they break apart, like say, you might say analogous might be a CME or a supernova or something, that's when you see this huge release of energy. And it's quite large. Imagine a ball that's 1/4 of an inch diameter releasing over 10 million watts. Okay, so we know that Sapphire is acting like a transforming capacitor. At least we know that much. Okay. What we've also been able to elucidate and determine for certain is that there's transmutation occurring within the anode or the core electrode and in the atmosphere. And if you'd watched our talks, we'd identified manganese as one of the elements that have shown up a number of times. You know, when we get it dialed in, and we know how to make manganese as an example. Okay, we know how to make it, which sounds, I guess, pretty, you know, like in scientific circles, that's when they tar and feather you and run you out in a rail. But it's what's happening, and particle physics can't explain that. Okay, and nuclear chemistry might be a closer brother that might be able to give us some indication what might be occurring in there. But I think it's missing a lot of things when you introduce electricity into the mix. It's not pure chemistry in that context. So the manganese is being produced in the atmosphere. It's not being produced, it doesn't look like it's being produced within or on the core electrode, okay? And we know that we don't have manganese in the chamber. It's not to the extent that we see it, because there's a lot. We did this summer run some experiments where we found what we call the missing manganese. In other words, we knew it was in the atmosphere, but we didn't see it on any of the materials. But when we did some scraping off the large copper cathodes that we have in there, is where we found out that the manganese is being homogeneously deposited across the whole surface. And that tells us a lot about its charge. It tells us a lot about you know, those things that are occurring in there. We don't know if that's an exothermic or endothermic reaction. That's work that we have to work on. And what we can find out, we have the ability and the technology and the team to be able to elucidate those things. So Sapphire makes manganese. We have evidence of making lithium. We know that it's making calcium and oxygen and carbon and titanium for certain. So it's making these things. Plus,
really interesting.
Plus a bunch of stuff, right? So it's a bit of a soup. It's a bit of a soup. What was interesting is you saw in the one video when Michael's our astrophysicist, and he's going through the interstellar medium, and he's picking out the non-organic elements that is seen there. And I'm thinking, like, I've seen these, where have I seen these before? And I'm looking through our material and it's like, wait a second here. These are all the listed out on the EDAX and analysis that we had done in EMSL, Microanalytical, who did the post-experimental analysis separately from us. It was a third-party corporation, and they found the same elements that we found, plus 2 more. But there was a match. Like, I think it was 9 out of the 11 that are in the interstellar medium is what Sapphire is producing. Now, we can't account for why that is. We can just say that it is. And so that, now the other thing that they predicted was the extremely high voltage drop that we would see just off the surface of the electrode. And I believe that original prediction was by Jurgens, that Wall and Don Thornhill have quoted. I thought it was Don Scott that actually had made that prediction. So I gave him the credit for it, but he told me later it was actually Ralph Jurgens. So we're doing measurements, you might say electrical potential measurements through the plasmas. And there's an extremely high voltage drop just off the surface. As a matter of fact, it goes to 0 in some cases. So imagine right now the anode has a particular charge. Let's just say, it's 1,000 volts. Okay, it's not, but let's just say it's 1,000 volts. What we'll see is that we pull the probe away, it'll drop down to 0, and it'll stay at 0 for some distance, not always, but for some distance, and then it goes right back up almost the same potential as the electrode, and then you'll start to see the changes as you pass through the double layers. You can see where there's a voltage is going up and down as we pass through those double layers. We've also measured this in what we call dark mode, where Sapphire generates an E field that you might say has structure to it, electrical structure. In other words, it's what we've been able to measure is that we bring the probe in from the sides of the chamber, which right now it's showing 0 voltage. And then you'll hit this voltage wall and you'll see it jump almost up to the same potential as the anode, and then come back down. And there's a kind of there's a frequency behavior there. Now, we don't know if that's some sort of artifact of the probe itself at this point in time, or if in fact that's a behavior of the plasma, okay? But we do know that it's there. And it is, and it does, once the plasma ignites, it changes. Its shape, you might say, the curve changes, becomes, it's very different. So, which is interesting because Scott Mainwaring, quoted me one time. He says, Monty, it was Edgar Allan Poe or somebody, he said, Monty, he said he talked about stars that don't emit light. Well, that's interesting, you're getting into the philosophical side of things, and is there any account for that maybe in science? So I said to Scott, like after we measured it, I was surprised. We did not expect to see any kind of field in there until the plasma was ignited. And but we did, and we ran a number of tests and experiments to show that that field is there and is very strong.
Very interesting to hear.
Yeah,
it's very exciting to hear this story, and it's yeah, very interesting. Do you want to say something more about the layers, or do you think we should go on to the next question about?
Well, we do know. What we do know as well is that there's certain higher concentrations of certain elements in certain regions of the plasma. So it has the ability to segregate elements. It's not a homogeneous mix. Now that's loaded for me. I mean, personally, when I saw that, I was quite surprised. I thought, okay, you've got this mix of gases and things that are in there, and you pass your probe through it, and you should see kind of a homogeneous, maybe higher, lower, whatever. And you're doing the optical spectroscopy, and you can see definitively where you have a higher concentration of, let's say, hydrogen. I mean, everybody knows we're using hydrogen. We're using other things as well, but hydrogen is one of the most obvious ones. And then in another area, you might find that there's more of that manganese, as an example. Okay. And why I find that amazing is because Michael will point out to you, that's what you see in the organization of these plasmas we see in outer space, where you see concentrations of certain elements, and they're segregated, they're separated. It's not just some homogeneous mix of soup. And now why nature does that, and why it does that in Sapphire, I don't think anybody knows right now, but these are things that we're looking at. We have the view that you measure something is one thing. So as an example, so we measure manganese, and we know we have manganese. That's one thing to say, okay, definitively we have manganese. The next question is, like how much of it do you have? What's its energy states? And the big question is, why does it form even in the first place? You see, are we fissioning elements? Is it building them? Is it like, building blocks? Is that how it comes about? Which, as I said earlier, I think we're going to be 10 years, there's a lot of work that has to be done. But I think it's going to give us a whole new understanding of what atoms are and their characteristics, their personalities, you might say. Because they really do act like they have, each one of them have a different personality in the way they behave. And I don't think that's much of a stretch for people that are in the science to say generally that's how they behave, and they behave very differently under certain conditions.
Would that, if there's different elements in these different layers, that would seem to indicate there's different energies able to create these different layers. And do you find different isotope ratios in these manganese?
What we'll say right now is that in the next phase of the project, we will be getting into isotopic analysis, both real-time and post-experimental analysis. I mean, one of our strengths is that we do a lot of real-time measurements within picoseconds, so we can see when things happen at a given time. And we cross-correlate that with other instruments as well. So let's say we see the probes going through and you see our higher voltage potential, at that time, let's say time. So time is the component where we're measuring something. And then maybe that's where we're seeing the manganese. You know. So what was your question again? It was...
did you know anything about how the isotope ratios
Right.
were
Okay.
distributed?
Okay, so what we suspect right now is that there is isotopes, but what we did not expect, we did not account for, bring capital equipment in to measure. We have not measured isotopes, not because they aren't there. We haven't done that yet, but that's our next phase. And there's a whole grocery list of capital equipment we're going to purchase to do that. And it's extremely important to us because, you know, the optical spectra of the manganese, in some cases, does not follow the Boltzmann's distribution. The thermal predictions that it says sometimes it's reversed, which means there's a non-thermal response, or, you know, it's not, we know that it's manganese, but the lines are reversed in their relative intensities in some cases. So we know, I would say we're about 99.9% sure we have isotopes in there. Well, why is that important? It's because if we can identify the isotopes maybe in real time, but at least post-experimental, we might be able to identify what process, like what they're breaking down from. So let's say it's a fissioning process that's occurring in there. You know, there's a lot of information on nucleotides that will give us some indication maybe of what its parent element was, as an example. And its isotopic nature. So we have not done that yet, but it is a super high priority for us.
Is the innermost layer superconducting?
I would say, see, Michael wrote me something here because I let him take a look at your questions. Give me a second here. Before I answer this, okay, because this is getting into...
Well, you know, we wanted to get right into it.
Oh, yeah. Well, plasma is considered to be generally superconducting. I mean, the thinner it is, interestingly enough, the less resistance you see. And I think anybody who's in the, okay, if I'm going to go there, you know, the lower or the higher your vacuum, of course, once you ignite a plasma, you watch the voltage drop off, you know, very, very low numbers. And so I think generally it's understood that plasmas generally are very highly conducting. Now, superconducting, it's a good question. Getting into the more denser plasmas, I mean, what we know is that resistivity increases as you end up with more density. So maybe less conducting, but you're going to find that it's going to have a lot more electrical current, which you know, I think maybe makes some sense.
I think that's a good answer, and on a complicated topic.
Well, it is complicated because you know, we're talking about induction, we're talking about resistance, we're talking about a lot of different characteristics of the plasma. You know, it's not as straightforward. Resistance is something that people can relate to, but it doesn't relate to its you know, to other electrical characteristics. But it's a good basic one. Okay.
Yeah. Should we go over to the next question about claims of the plasma reactor that can create a highly plasma reaction between 2 megawatts and 10 megawatts? Okay,
can you repeat the question? It was a little bit garbled on my
it's claim about the plasma reactor. A reactor can create highly plasma reaction between 2 megawatts and 10 megawatts.
Correct.
Is it correct?
Yes. So as I said before earlier, if you consider the paper that we wrote, and it was peer reviewed and published, okay? Inside those double layers are what we call energy wells. So you can look at Sapphire in those wells as an electrical capacitor in layman's terms. And it's storing up that energy that's in there. So you might say it's kind of a plasma battery capacitor, you might say, in a way. If that comes apart or breaks apart, is when you'll see this huge release surge. It's not a spike. A spike is a very short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So a surge of energy being released. So we know that that energy is being stored in there. The highest energies that we did read were over 10 megawatts.
So this energy is basically coming when these plasma layers, what, explode?
Yeah, you could say they explode, or they, it happens very fast.
It just like evaporates or something.
Well, it looks like that's what happens, but we see it in the instrumentation, right?
Oh, right.
And we do, and it does. Sorry.
I mean, is this also part of the commercial stage of the product, or what?
Well, we're getting way down the road there. Since this is LENR, people could appreciate right now that what we've got is the next phase of the project right now is to examine what we call, in layman's terms, the fuel. So I want to break that down for a moment. You put gasoline in your car. That's part of the fuel. The other part of the fuel is the actual gas that your car brings in. And once you bring them together and you ignite them, those two work as the fuel. So it's not only the gasoline oil, but it's also the oxygen and nitrogen and other things that work together to give you that release of this energy. So what we know right now is that we do have nuclear reactions. Some of them are endothermic, some of them are exothermic. And our intent right now is to identify the best, you might say, fuel mix. Okay. So over the next phase, that's what that's going to be about. But to that point, I think it's important that one of the priorities that we have is remediation of nuclear waste. Now, what we know, and your LENR community, I would say probably knows very well, is that when you have a plasma like this, it creates a lot of heat. So Sapphire will produce electricity. We don't know, we haven't been able to quantify its efficiency, okay? But we do know that it will produce electricity because it's so hot. We have to get that heat out of there for it to continually to work. And we also know too that we can remediate nuclear waste and produce electricity concurrently in the same reactor, because again, it's a plasma. So there's a lot of people who want to make a claim to fame that, well, we've got the newest, greatest energy device. Okay, we're a very pragmatic bunch. We know that we had a huge rise in temperature over time, and it was almost no latency between the amount of energy that we saw coming off of the core and the rate of time that it was actually increasing the temperature of the reactor. Now I've never seen that happen before. It's like starting your engine up in your car, and within 30 seconds, it's already reached its maximum temperature. That's a huge mass. Okay, so that would mean that there's a huge amount of energy going into that whole structure in order for that to happen. Now, keep in mind, Sapphire weighs about 2,000 pounds. It's a big reactor. You could fit 10 people inside. So it's a big, thick, heavy chamber. It's not a little thing. So if you're going to heat that up, that takes a lot of energy, and it usually takes a little time, and then it comes to a place where it's in a stable state. So what we have to do, we know that there's certain alloys and gas compositions under certain electrical and pressure conditions that give us these reactions. We have to refine, you might say, the fuel over the next 2-3 years. And then we know how big, you might say, a radiator, okay, what we need, to boil water, how much energy is there. Then you can design your boiler and your turbine and your generator, you see.
Do you think it will need to be as big as you speak about, or do you think it will be able to scale up and down in size?
It's a great question. I mean, the plasmas that we have in Sapphire are very much scalable. How big we can go, I mean, we haven't gone there. We're theoretically, you should be able to go as big as you want or as small as you want, theoretically. But we're a bunch of engineers and applied physicists, okay? So we're like, yeah, it sounds great, but like to have a saying in Canada, United States, show me the money.
Yeah.
Okay? Prove it, right? So that's kind of where we live. So we've agreed that we're not going to add a lot of hyperbole or like puff stuff up. But at the same time, not talk it down either. We try to tell people, we work very hard at telling you what we've discovered and what we think it means.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to make sure that we're being honest and truthful with people, and not you can only do your best where people get misled. I mean, everybody is going to hear me speaking today, and everyone's going to leave and they're going to take away from this conversation what they think maybe I said. And we try very hard to make sure that's clear so they don't get a misunderstanding, and that at the same time that they also appreciate how important this work is. Because I think personally, between the LENR community and what we're doing and others that are working in this field, our assessment of this is that's going to change everything in science. Our whole understanding of what an atom is, its nature, I think the textbooks are going to get rewritten over the next number of years.
Let me ask you about that energy just for a second.
Mhm.
Did you measure electrical energy, or was this thermal energy?
Well, electrically, it came in two forms. One was actually the voltage, and the other was the actual electromagnetic field that it generated. The electromagnetic field, we didn't have equipment that could actually measure that high. It went right off the scale. So the electromagnetic surge was huge. Like, we don't know what it was. We just know it was way off. Thermal. Well, that's a really great question. Thermal energy is a different animal, because thermal energy itself is really a response to all these other things that are occurring. Ultimately, all that energy, not all of it, but a lot of that energy, or those, the energy that's in the UV range and other reactions, ultimately is going to express itself in some sort of what we call a thermal response. Okay. So, and that has to do with things, if you consider the ultraviolet light that we measure, it's quite intense. The materials that are there are going to respond to that energy, and it's what we call radiation emissions. So ultimately, you're going to get a thermal response, which would be like your black body radiation. It's going to heat it up, okay? And then you can measure the temperature. But a thermal response is always like it's responding to that environment. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're all looking for a new energy technology. And with this experiment, you're seeing so much new science along with possible and a path to a new energy technology. How are you going to decide what to follow next? Because it sounds like you could do 20 different experiments and find some success. How are you going to move this forward and decide which avenue you're going to research?
What a lovely question, because the investment group that we're dealing with right now is asking us the same thing. So I love it. It's great. Okay, first priority right now is this. The project itself, over the last year, September, we released a video and some later results that we did in the summertime. But since September, we have been getting unsolicited investors. And in discussions with them, they're very much aware of the nuclear waste issue that we have in the world. That's huge. We also know about the energy. We also know too that the tests that were run at MIT definitively show that in this environment, we can remediate nuclear waste. Now, how much we can, other things. So you might say that that's kind of low, what we would consider low-hanging fruit, okay? So we're already in contact with Canadian nuclear labs and other research labs here in Canada that are considered to be really the top in the world. As you know, Canada produces certain medical isotopes, and we're the only country in the world that does that. So there's a really high skill set level here. And we actually met with a group just this past week. Now, what that's all about is to formulate, how do you deal with this material? Because right now we deal with and only benign materials or non-radioactive materials. So in a case like this, we can set up a new lab. We're looking at either setting up 2 or 3 labs. We're going to call them super labs. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And these super labs would be like the one you see with Sapphire, but on steroids with other things like gamma and neutron detection and neutrino, and just keep on going. And with respect to what kind of technology we're going to bring to bear on this. And so what we would do is set up another super lab that's specifically designed to work in the nuclear remediation. The idea behind it is that we would work with this company in Canada directly. We haven't got any legal or corporate things worked out. We're just in initial discussions about what's possible. That puts us 2 years ahead of what our initial plan was. We didn't really expect to get involved with these people until 2 years from now, because we thought, well, let's set up Sapphire. Let's start running some of the tests that we've got. And then as we go along, we can start to develop these relationships, because when you're dealing with these large corporations, that's usually a fairly slow process. You know, you make a telephone call, you get a call back a month later, kind of thing. But that's not what's happened. They're all over this because they see it as a problem, and it is a problem.
We can't wait. We can't wait.
So, I mean, we're corporately, we're scrambling right now to keep up with, to put the budget together, to put what's called a private memorandum together to bring in the investment dollars that we need. We think between 30 and 50 million is what we're going to go after initially, and put together a very comprehensive experimental plan to justify the capital equipment we need to purchase. Because I was an investor like, Monty, why do you want this? It's like, oh, well, because it's cool. You know, it doesn't work very well. How does this piece of equipment, I mean, why would you want a neutron detector? Well, just because it's great. I can tell everybody I've got one, you know. And how does that play into your plan on, you know, what you're doing? Well, if Sapphire and the benign materials is releasing neutrons as an example, there could be some radioactivity that's occurring during the reactions that we've had in the past. But after we shut the experiment down, some of those isotopes are short-lived. By the time we open up the chamber, there's no radioactivity. So we need to know, you know, when these things are occurring. And we can tell you, okay, at this point in time, you know, if there's neutrons being released, there's some evidence that some people will claim that we shouldn't see any, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to get transmutation. It doesn't mean you're not going to get exothermic reactions. It just means maybe under these conditions in the LENR community, I'm fairly certain there's some that indicate that they're getting some neutrons, maybe and maybe not, but it doesn't mean it's not true. So, but we do need to know, because, you know, if you're going to create an energy reactor down the road, it's not a good idea to have something that's radioactive sitting in your backyard. So we have to know these things. So that's why we want to build at least 2 super labs. It would mean upgrading Sapphire to become what we're calling a super lab.
Will this lab be in the US, or do we have the plan for that?
Right now, the plan is to have it in Canada.
Canada, okay.
Right now, one in Toronto in the nuclear remediation site, and then another location, not in Toronto, someplace else. And you know, and so why would we do all that? Well, because it starts to get down into an engineering and material study and metallurgy, because everybody in the LENR community is going to know that, well, once you start changing the palladium or whatever materials you're working with, it no longer has the same mechanical structural properties. When you're dealing in a hot plasma like that, it's very important to understand what its life is going to be. So we're seeing transmutation, like we've got 2 types of anodes, right? We've got the hollow one that people talk about, and then we've got solid ones. We're seeing transmutation occur all the way through, not on the surface, but all the way through the core. So we're treating the solid alloys. We're not treating the solid alloys anymore as though they're solid. We're going to treat them like, you might say, a metal lattice, in a way that more like sand. And then the gas itself is more like water. And it just, the last test that we ran in the summertime is indicating that that's what's occurring. So So what does that? Well, it means if you're working with different alloys, you're working with different materials, you need to know. Well, you can predict, say, well, if I'm using this material, I know what its melting temperature is, but now it's changing. Is it just gonna like last for 10 minutes and just like melt off and fall like a blob in the bottom of the reactor? As an example. So, so we have a lot of material studies, metallurgy. We're going to be employing 3D printer. Like our 3D printer for what we want for 3D printing will be an alloy printer, as an example. So, the cost for one of those is about $500,000. So we say super lab. And then the other thing is, well, we want an SEM and EDAX machine along with gas chromatography and line of sight and laser ablation. Why is that important? Because we want to understand some of the isotopes that we're seeing. And, an SEM EDAX machine, what's a used one? You could probably pick up a good used one for, $300,000, $400,000. So the prices go up, but that's what you need. You need those technologies to bring to bear to do this properly. And I think we're at a place now where people have watched our work over the years to know that, we're pretty hardcore guys. Like we're not salesmen. We're not trying to tell everybody that, oh yeah, we got the greatest idea, give me millions of dollars. It's like, nobody's going to give you millions of dollars unless they can see there's material substance to the work and that it's repeatable. And so
oh, go ahead.
No, it's good.
You're pulling in so many different disciplines, different capabilities. How do you go about managing all of this collaborations, which is happening globally? You've got,
Okay.
connections all over.
Well, I've got a story for you. Let's just stop at the one question, because that's a beautiful question. Because we're dealing with scientists, right? And they're a different breed altogether, aren't they? And I came out of the automotive industry, and the largest project I worked on was worth over $4 billion. And it was for a program for Toyota. And I came out of engine drivetrain development on high performance engines and other things. And so I've worked with large teams. I find with scientists, it's more like trying to herd cats. Okay. And even this morning, we've been through it this morning. We have our meetings, our morning meetings, and it's like, guys, we need to stay on point here. We have a budget we need to complete. And it's like, but we could be running experiments on this thing here. I said, yes, that's true. But guess what? We've got to focus in on getting this budget finished and get this thing wrapped up. I know it's like getting root canal in your teeth. And I'm not going to give you any painkillers. You're just going to have to suck it up, boys. We've got to focus on this and get it through. And scientists want to talk about, there's a full moon, or there's this or this going on. And you know what I'm talking about, right? So it is a collaborative approach. And I've got a lot of experience bringing people from a whole plethora of disciplines together. One of the big things is the psychological wall that you have to get past. And that is that most people, when you join a new team, they feel very insecure. And they may be very good in their discipline, but they also know too that there's many things that maybe they don't know. And one of the strengths that we have is that once somebody has become acclimatized to the environment that we have, they realize that they don't have to know anything. It's really important. So they don't have to feel that they're intimidated because they might not have an answer. Because there's a lot of unanswered questions. And so when they get past that, they become very relaxed. And when that happens is when you can really start to brainstorm and bring in ideas. And
can I ask how many of you are in the team?
Well, altogether, I guess the greater team would probably be about 20. The core team would make up about 9. You've got guys like Hal Putoff and others that are at an advisory level. And I know that he worked with, oh man, the guy's name starts with an S, it just escapes me right now. I forgot the name, but he was working on EVOs years ago. this guy. Okay. And
Ken Shoulders?
yeah, Ken Shoulders. So, I mean, those are resources. Like Hal's not a part of the core team, but he would be a person that we would use to have discussions to maybe help formulate ideas or concepts. You see, we were invited to MIT to give a lecture. They're on their advanced propulsion. They had an advanced propulsion lecture a couple of years ago, and so he's there. Jim Ryder he passed away a year and a half ago. Now I guess maybe 2018. I guess really 2 years ago. George Hathaway's on our team. He's actually part of the core. I don't know if you guys know George Hathaway, but he's been involved with a lot of pretty exotic sciences, including guys like John Hutchinson and others. And so we have there's quite a diverse group. But you need that. Part of the problem with a lot of the scientists, in my view, and it's just to try to encourage some of your listeners, I'm a collaborator. This is not the Monty Charles show, even though maybe I'm being interviewed today, but Sapphire didn't get here by myself. This is truly a team effort from multiple disciplines. But a lot of scientists, they really struggle with this because they have an idea, they're on their own, and it's not easy for them to be able to collaborate with others. And I think that's missing. It doesn't mean that they have to give up their IP, because I haven't had to. But it does mean that, all the core team are shareholders in our company. You see. So Michael, he's a shareholder. Paul's a shareholder.
In the field of LENR, it's the same.
Yeah.
If you work together, I think we come to the solution faster.
Well, you have to, but you have to have a commercial side. Like a lot of scientists aren't business people. And I've got I'm a bit of a hybrid because I've got business experience plus a lot of engineering and applied physics side. And I learned over the years that with scientists, I find that they're very weak at a business level. But if they're open up a little bit, there's a way that they can come in. You could maybe form corporations of people that are helpful. And they become they take an equity position, because every scientist knows that, okay, they go to work for a company and they don't get paid a whole lot. Maybe some do, but they don't get paid a whole lot. And after 25 years, they just get a thank you and a card.
Yeah.
And I determined that wasn't going to happen with this team. See, and that's also why it is that we've, for security, for IP, is not a problem for us. You see, and that means that we can open up and discuss openly about it, because, well, each person contributes to bringing that intellectual property to maturity. And we've got 3, 4, 5 patents, I think, that some that are in the process right now.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more to come. So we can really take off. Like we can accelerate very quickly with this.
Well, this is such an exciting project, and thank you for coming and being so open and helping us understand what Sapphire's about. And I hope that you'll come back and tell us some more successful science later this year, next year. And we wish you so much luck with this.
Well, you know what? Thank you very much. I really wish the LENR community all the best. I mean, I know, and we know very well the challenges that people are facing in this field. The evidence that you have is enough to know that you must not turn your back on it. See, and if you do, it would be a travesty, scientific travesty. But the thing is, I'm encouraged because apparently the European Commission has now recognized what they call hydrogen metal energy. I mean, they're all calling it different things because they don't want to call it cold fusion or whatever, which I understand. There's a whole Pons and Fleischmann thing here,
Yes.
And even NASA. Okay, I was listening to one guy's Forsley. Okay, and he's writing it. I mean, he's talking about cold fusion. Okay, but he can't say the word cold fusion. But he's saying it's like, well, it's kind of happening at room temperature. It's like, okay. And it's a bit of a bugger, you know, because, you know, we have to watch our language, you know, because it has to be so perfect, because people are just going to beat us up if we don't use the correct terms. And but I would want to encourage everybody that's in this field, and it's tough. It's tough in one way to get the recognition that it deserves, but it's also tough because it is leading edge science. This is not pseudoscience. These are experiments that are rendering material substance results.
Mm-hmm.
Now, repeatability is a challenge for many. I'd recommend, from our perspective, because we are very good at repeating things, is look up design of experiments. If I was going to leave this, one last thing is take a look at design of experiments. It's boring. It is tedious. It's meticulous, but it's very powerful, because if you want to go back and repeat your results, you really got to take care in how you go back and get it dialed in. If you don't, your results are going to be varied, and that's really tough to deal with. And so that's why Paul's on, because Paul's an expert in design of experiments. That's why he's on our team. So I guess, I don't know if our time is up. Is our time up now?
Yes, and Montgomery Childs, if people want to learn more about the Sapphire project, where should they go?
They can go to the Aureon.ca website, which is AUREON. It is made up of two Latin words. Eon is obvious, an age, and aura, which is AURA, which has different interpretations, but it really means heavenly wind, or wind from heaven. Okay.
Love it.
Thank you so much, Monty. Absolutely brilliant. Terrific. Thank you.
You have to have vision. You're welcome. I'm honored. Thank you very much. I think I love your forum. I don't get to go on very often. I do watch some of the conversations, and I know it's like, well, we could repeat this, and they're investigating, and they're trying to do high resolution pictures of stuff I had in the back of my garage. And I'm thinking, well, where did they get that picture from? He's like, then I'm talking to Michael. I said, Michael, did you let that picture out? Wasn't me, boss. So it just means that you guys are really, you know, you're really digging in, and you're trying to find out everything we're doing. And we do try to release as much as we can. But we do have shareholders. It is a company, and we have to protect them as well. So we're trying to find that balance.
Of course. We understand that.
Yeah.
I'm very glad that you come to the show. It's really great. Thank you very much.
Well, as I said, go ahead.
I want to just tell everybody that they can find more episodes of our interviews on LENRforum.com. That's where we'll be posting this interview. And as we continue to look at the new energy landscape and see what's out there, what's on the horizon that can give us a zero carbon future, we're going to be sharing everything with the listeners, and you can find more on LENR-forum.com.
Yes, and 2020 have been a very great year for LENR. We have 2 EU-funded projects. We have Google we have NASA statements. Yep. So 2020 is a good year for LENR, I think.
It's absolutely awesome news. It means, guess what? You guys aren't nuts.
Yeah.
You're not a bunch of crazies. Okay, after all, you know, you're not a bunch of kooks, okay? It's like, really, well, why is NASA doing this? And why is the EC doing this? That's great news. It should be encouraging to anybody in this field.
And next year will be even better, because then we don't have COVID-19, I hope.
Oh, that's a whole nother conversation. Yes.
Yeah.
No, we're not going to do it.
No. Skip it.
In the future.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you again, Montgomery Childs, and we hope to talk with you again later next year.
Excellent.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao.